We're very happy that you all signed up. Gemma, if you could go to the next slide. So basically what we'll do in this call is first we'll give you an introduction into access to medicines and into our organization, because some of you might have heard of our organization before, but for some of you it might also be completely new. And then we'll have a short break and then talk a little bit about access to medicines in the time of COVID-19 and update you on our campaign so far. And also tell you about our plans going ahead and create a bit of an opportunity for all of us to get to know each other a bit better. If you have any questions during the call, you can post them into the chat or send them to Nihal. So Gemma, if you can go to the next slide. So basically, you write his name Nihal, and he can collect all the questions, and then we'll create some time as well for questions and answers. And so the other people that are on this call that are helping out, so Ryan, and she'll give the access to medicines introduction. I'll introduce our organization. Nihal will be responsible for the questions and answers. And if you have any problems with communication, you can ask Gemma. Okay, so let's get this ball rolling. So why are we all here on this call today? Basically, before even the pandemic started, 2 billion people worldwide lacked access to essential medicines. And according to the WHO and the World Bank, there's 100 million people annually that are pushed into extreme poverty due to their inability to pay for healthcare. And although there's obviously many underlying issues that cause this problem, one of the problems that contributes to this is the affordable pricing of medicines. So according to the WHO's roadmap at 2019-2023, access depends on having appropriate products available at affordable prices, and lack of access can affect patient outcomes if patients go undiagnosed or untreated or receive suboptimal treatment. So this is really quite a big global health issue that extends way beyond the corona epidemic. So I want to start a little bit broader, and then we'll zoom in on this epidemic. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So basically, why is this important? So this is really important also because of the Sustainable Development Goal 3.8 to achieve universal health coverage. And this is why the WHO has said that equitable access to health products, that this is a global priority. So if you can go to the next slide. So basically, why are we talking about universities in this context? This might sound a bit weird because, well, if you think about medicines, you might think of pharmaceutical companies directly, but actually a quarter to a third of all new medicines originate from a university lab. So universities carry out a lot of the fundamental treatment that goes into the development of new drugs and new molecules. And they also train a lot of biomedical scientists that then may go on to work for pharmaceutical companies. So basically, universities are quite essential in the development process of new treatments. So our organization, Universities Allied for Essential Medicines, believes that public funded research should be used in a way that benefits the global community. However, this does not always happen because of the way that novel health innovations are commercialized. So I would like to illustrate this with an example, and I'll try to explain all the separate terms, but if there's anything you don't understand, feel free to ask, and we're also going to have a whole session on what it all means later. So if you go to the next slide, please. So to introduce you to the problem of access to medicines and why universities matters, I would like to take you back to another global epidemic, which is that of HIV/AIDS. So this is another virus that really took grip of the world, and this was actually the health crisis in which Universities Allied for Essential Medicines was founded. And it's also a story of how students at universities made real tangible differences in the area of access to medicines. So if we go back to 2001, more than 200,000 people a year died from AIDS every year in South Africa, which is approximately the same as one world Trade Center attack every week of the year. Still, this was not something that was seen as a major world news, and there was not much being done about this. So in this context, Médecins Sans Frontières, like MSF, opened its first treatment clinic in a slum in South Africa. However, they faced a very big challenge, which was the very high price tag of antiretrovirals at the time. A triple regimen that was needed to treat HIV patients at the time costed around 10,000 US dollars per patient per year, which is of course a huge amount. So basically they found out that one of the critical components of this triple therapy against HIV was a drug called Stavudine, which is brand name Zerit, and you can see it on the top right of your screen. And this became one of the most frequently prescribed antiretrovirals in the world from 1998 onwards. So this drug alone already cost around $6,000 per patient per year. However, because it was under a patent, this meant that there was a monopoly for the company that was selling Zerit, and the South African government was not able to procure this drug for its citizens. So basically, there was this very big AIDS conference at the time in Durban in 2001, and one of the people that attended was a student, and her name was Amy Kipczynski. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So basically what turned out to be the case is that this drug called Stavudine, also known as D4T, was a nucleotide analog reverse transcript inhibitor. You can forget that immediately, but it was a molecule that was found to be very effective against HIV by researchers at Yale University. What happened, however, is that Yale patented the drug, which means that there's kind of a government-issued certification that for 20 years you have a monopoly on using, making, or selling a certain invention. And this happened already quite some time ago in 1996. And they then licensed this exclusively to a pharmaceutical company called Bristol Myers Squibb. So that means that this company was the only company that was allowed to produce and sell and make this drug. And they gave Yale a lot of money in return. Actually, not even that much money, because usually universities don't even get that much return from commercializing their research, unfortunately. But what happened in this case is that MSF, they contacted a student, Amy, who was at the conference, who was just starting her first year of law at Yale University. And she, together with Médecins Sans Frontières, started this very big project where they wanted to convince Yale to renegotiate their license with Bristol Myers Squibb to kind of allow for the generic, which is kind of off-brand, cheaper production of this medicine. So they first wrote to the university saying, so Doctors Without Borders really wants to use this medicine. Is there anything you can do? They said, no, we license it exclusively to this company, so our hands are tied. And they tried to talk to the company, but that didn't help either. So this is when Amy started this campaign at her university, where she and her fellow students were arguing, like, Yale is a non-profit educational institution. It receives $250 million in annual research funding, which means that they should really make sure that there's a return to the global community. And actually, through extensive research, they found out that between 1994 and 2000, like the year 2000, Yale had made $262 million in royalties on the sales of this drug, Stavudine. And Yale, for example, erected a whole new medical building, which price was like $176 million. A third of it was paid by the royalties from this drug. So the university was arguing that without exclusive licensing, no pharmaceutical company would have been willing to develop the medicine further, put it through clinical trials, and really bring it to market. However, Amy and her fellow students started to campaign against this, and they started a very, very large petition, first of all, which was signed by a lot of students and faculty members, For example, one of the immunologists working at Yale signed the petition saying, "I became a scientist because I wanted to create new cures for diseases around the world. And now I find out that Yale's turning results of publicly funded research into corporate profit." So it really raised a lot of attention and a lot of media attention. And obviously Yale wasn't happy with this. So they actually also told Amy that if she wouldn't stop pursuing this topic, that they would threaten her with expulsion. But Amy was not deterred by this. And if you go to the next slide, please. Basically, in the end, what happened is that someone at the New York Times heard about this case, and a reporter then called and had an interview with the person who originally developed the drug, which was a professor called William Prusoff. And he said that for him, it became apparent that the drug Dr. Lin and he had developed was not reaching millions of desperately suffering people because they lacked the money to purchase it. He made some very strong message that he thinks that his drug should be more available. And suddenly, within days, Bristol Myers Squibb announced that it would cut the cost of Zerit to 15 cents for a daily dose, which is only 1.5% of the cost to an American patient. So basically, Bristol Myers Squibb didn't make any reference to the university activism, but in the end, because of the public pressure that surmounted out of this university campaign, Bristol Myers Squibb dropped the price from $1,600 per year to $55 per year. So basically, this caused a huge price drop in this one antiretroviral. And at the time, there was a lot of other efforts going on as well to make antiretrovirals more accessible. So a lot of other antiretrovirals also dropped in price during this time, which really made HIV treatments a lot more affordable. So basically, what we learned from this is that aggressive market-oriented behavior is not really consistent with universities' non-for-profit missions. So if you go to the next slide, please. The big question is like, is this just Yale, and is it just the case of Zenit? So actually, during the HIV/AIDS crisis between around 1988 to 2005, there was 25% of the drugs to treat HIV were actually patented by universities, including the University of Minnesota, Emory University, and Duke University. So it's quite a lot of American universities. And similarly, universities hold patents on a lot of other important medicines, including for hepatitis C and tuberculosis. So actually, it goes a lot further, though, than just medicines. So the World Health Organization uses the term health technology, which is the application of organized knowledge and skills in the form of devices, medicines, vaccines, procedures, and systems developed to solve a health problem and improve the quality of lives. So that's quite a long definition, but that's basically to say that when we go back to talk about COVID, that we really mean any diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines developed for addressing coronavirus, that is all the different things that we cover. So if you could go to the next slide. Then just to finish off, so what is UAEM? So UAEM is Universities Allied for Essential Medicines. And basically our mission is to promote access to medicines, make sure that university research meets health needs, and to empower students to take greater action in calling their universities to responsibility on these topics. And so the idea is really that students come together and take ownership of their university, make sure that universities fulfill their mission to the global community. So if you go to the next slide, how do we, oh, actually you might need to click one more time, yes. So how do we do this? So we have different areas that we work in. So we work in the areas of access, innovation, empowerment, and transparency. So this is only to highlight that there's lots of different projects that we as Universities Allied for Essential Medicines are working on. So if there's anything else you'd like to get involved with, feel free to just contact us. But we'll just now we'll start to get you rolling on the COVID-19 campaign, which is obviously very exciting. So if you could go to the next slide. Just to finish off, what happened to Amy, like the girl who was nearly kicked out of Yale for taking action on access to medicines at her university. So actually, in the end, she wasn't kicked out of Yale, and she actually became a professor at Yale, and she started this global movement, which you're now also becoming part of. So I think what we really need in this COVID-19 pandemic is to find our new Amy's, and I hope that there's some amongst you who are willing to take this forward. So yeah, that's a little history of Universities Allied for Essential Medicines and what our main aims are as an organization. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them to Nihal or type them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them.
We do one about who we tend to have in our campaigns. So if it's normally medical students or we get people from law.
Well, actually, so I'm not a medical student myself, so I'm always very keen on making sure that there's a lot of non-medical students as well. So it really doesn't make any kind of difference what kind of background you have, as long as you have an enthusiasm for access to medicines. Actually, what is also really useful as a background is to have a background in law or economics or anything. I personally have a background in medical anthropology, which is not super relevant, but because I really have this interest in improving access to medicines, I just got right into the topic. So don't worry if you're not a medic.
I just add to that, I think normally we have medical students because they've got nice long degrees, but if you go across to the US, they tend to be all law students. So it's a strange UAEM divide we have between two continents. Yeah, I guess that wraps up that session.
Yeah, and just the first question, like about whether anyone has seen universities use their technologies in a certain way. Actually, I think one of the things we see a lot is that students are not really aware of what kind of research goes on in their university. And often researchers themselves even don't really know what happens with their research after it starts to get commercialized. So one thing that we really want for you to learn on this campaign as well is really what's happening at my university, or if you work on a different university's campaign, like what it really goes on at university, and to get closer connected in that sense.
And then we just had two more questions about what we can do in terms of lobbying and other actions. And I'll shoot that one over to Rhiannon because I imagine she's about to speak about some of that.
Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, really good questions, and I'm really glad that you see that and are immediately asking what you can do at your university. That's exactly the point of this campaign. We want to give you guys the knowledge and the skills and the capacity to be able to do the kind of stuff that Amy did at Yale and make a really impactful difference in your institutions. So the way that this is going to work going forward, and we'll give you a proper outline kind of more towards the end, but we're going to have one of these sessions each week, and each session is going to build on knowledge. So it's going to be on a particular topic. This week is a general introduction, and then we're going to go more specifically as we go forward. And after the knowledge session, you'll be given, you'll be put into your teams at your different universities, and you'll be given tasks that will be part of building up this campaign. So don't worry, you won't have to you won't be set off out there on your own, say just go and do loads of lobbying, go and make this work. We have a really structured way for the campaigns to go forward, and you'll be taught on a particular subject and then given a piece of activism to do on the particular subject. And that will carry on going until kind of by the 5th session, you'll have not only a lot of knowledge, but we've also got some really exciting people coming in from ACT UP, who do creative activism and are famous around the world for their incredibly creative activism, which is, really useful in times when we're trying to do activism online. So as we go forward, you'll be trained not only in the knowledge you need to do this activism, but actually in how you do campaigning and activism as well. The point of what we want to get universities to do is to make vaccines affordable, vaccines, diagnostics, or therapeutics, anything that comes out of your university. It needs to be affordable and accessible, not just to people in the UK. A big part of this fight is trying to counteract the fact that the pharmaceutical system in general, and so much of the governance of global health is very much dominated by countries in the global north, and the policies that are made very rarely reflect the needs of the global south. And yeah, having a global campaign is very much part of it. So although UK universities are the target, and in case of some of the more national stuff, it will be UK policy, the vision is very much global, and you can very much influence global access to medicines by working in the UK. So we've given you an overview of the issue of access to medicines and why it's so important. And I think we all agree that it's an incredibly important issue and something that universal healthcare can't be achieved without having equitable access to affordable technologies. So as Soraya pointed out, access to medicines means a couple of things. It means having medicines that are affordable. It means having medicines that are appropriate for your disease and in your setting. And it means having medicines that are available to you at the time that you need them. And there are a couple of global structures which shape the way that access to medicines plays out. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview, but don't worry, because we're going to have individual training sessions on basically everything I say here, so that you can build up your knowledge and know what to do about them. So the first one of the kind of three of access to medicines is affordability. And one of the main things that prevents affordability in the case of access to medicines is monopolies. So a monopoly means that one particular company has the rights to produce and sell a particular drug. If they're the only one who has the rights to produce and sell it, that means that they have complete control over the setting of the price of that drug. So this is facilitated by the patent system, which was originally designed to incentivize innovation, but has swung so far in the favor of private profit that it's a monopoly-based system, which basically completely prioritizes the market and the profits of these pharmaceutical companies over what is actually needed for public health. Pharmaceutical companies often argue that they need these profits for the cost of making a medicine, but when you break the monopoly, the price of a medicine can drop between 80 and 90%. So that really shows you how cheap it actually would be to kind of medicate the world with actually what they needed. And making medicines for profit makes you do very different things to if you were doing them for public health. And this also is reflected in the second part of the kind of access to medicine sphere, which is appropriate. So you need a medicine that's going to treat your disease and that's suitable for your context. If you're making medicines for profit, firstly, you don't bother, or you invest a lot less in developing medicines to treat diseases where the market is very small. You want to invest a lot in diseases like cancer, which are treated heavily in rich countries and which you can charge a lot of money for, and you want to invest a lot less in things like neglected tropical diseases or diseases that affect mostly communities in the global south, or, for example, an unknown future pandemic. Many of you may have seen the article that actually there was research into a coronavirus vaccine, but it couldn't get any funding because there was no profitable market for it in the future. And also, the profit-based research environment creates an environment that's very secretive and competitive, and that really hampers collaborative innovation between a lot of these institutions. And the third thing that we need to think about is availability. You need to have supply of these medical products in your country available to you. And that is to do with the ability to make them. Much of manufacturing of medicines is dominated by countries in the global north, and that is partly to do with the patent system and partly to do with things like ability to invest in manufacturing capacity. And that's also something that's going to come up as a problem when we eventually get to mass producing COVID health technologies. So, in summary, the current pharmaceutical system was originally designed for innovation, now very much prioritizes profit over public health. It excludes those who don't make a profitable market, and it's also propped up by huge levels of public financing without necessarily seeing public benefit. So that's an overview of the systems that are in place. Don't worry, again, we're going to have sessions on all of these and we'll go into a lot more detail about the different things that they mean. But if you could go to the next slide, and we'll talk a bit about access to medicines in the COVID pandemic. So lots of you will have seen various different government leaders talking about how any future COVID vaccine has to be a global public good. This is fantastic, and we can really capitalize on this as the access to medicines movement and try and build that case for a global public good. However, there is serious concerns about whether this will be turned into a reality. And based on the system that we currently have in place, unless we have active public intervention, statements of principle and kind of generic pledges won't be enough to get us to a point where a vaccine and anything else is available and free at the point of use. And a vaccine doesn't necessarily mean the end of a disease, especially if you don't put in these conditions and these safeguards for access to medicines. So for example, the pneumonia vaccine, which is administered to babies, called PCV13, it is currently under monopoly of Pfizer, and it costs hundreds of dollars because of this monopoly. Despite the fact that Gavi subsidizes the cost of this vaccine in developing countries, many countries still can't afford it, and especially people who are paying out of pocket for their medicines. In India alone, more than 100,000 preventable infant deaths occur a year because of lack of access to this vaccine, while in the meantime, Pfizer brings in roughly $5 billion a year from revenue. So creating a vaccine and having a successful vaccine doesn't mean that it's going to be eradicated, and it definitely doesn't mean it's going to be eradicated for countries who might not be able to pay a very high price tag. And this monopoly risk does exist for products related to COVID. A good example of this is Gilead, who own the patent of remdesivir, which I'm sure lots of you will have seen is being trialed as a potential COVID treatment. Very controversially, Gilead applied for a patent extension in the US of this for their monopoly over this drug, which was granted, but after public outcry, they had to rescind. However, they still have a full monopoly over this drug, and we'll see whether it's effective, and then we'll see what they do with that monopoly. But the risk is still very much there. Aside from monopoly and linked to monopoly, pricing of a vaccine or therapeutics could very much still be an access issue. Johnson & Johnson are hoping to develop a vaccine that could reach the market as early as 2021, and they've announced an estimated price of $10 per dose. Although this may seem affordable in wealthy nations, this price would put a vaccine against COVID-19 out of reach of almost all low and middle income countries at mass scale. It could very easily create market exclusivity for high income countries that are in a position to hoard the vaccine in large quantities. This isn't hypothetical. In the H1N1 influenza pandemic in 2009, wealthy countries who could afford the vaccine negotiated advanced orders and stockpiled it to the detriment of developing countries. Finally, the last risk I want to highlight, which we will be working against, is the fact that even if you do have these things developed and licensed, they might not be equitably distributed. We've already seen bans on exporting PPE. We've already seen stockpiling of various essential medicines and PPE, and it's a real risk that that same thing could happen with any therapeutics. However, it's not all bad news, and this is the reason why we want so many of you to be engaged and fighting for this, because there is a huge opportunity here for the access to medicines movement. There's never been so many people talking about the importance of having a vaccine as a global public good and of everyone being able to afford it. No one's really arguing over this in the general public, and there's huge support behind this idea. And this means that we have an incredible opportunity to really build the access to medicines movement, not just for COVID, but going beyond for things like TB, HIV, and malaria as well. And a couple of opportunities which I wanted to highlight are opportunities like arguing for an open intellectual property system. The picture of the man at the bottom right signing something, that's the president of Costa Rica. He's recently submitted a proposal to the World Health Organization and its member states to create a global pool for intellectual property rights for COVID-19. This is a pretty unprecedented move by a member state, and is just one example of how the move to open licensing is really being catalyzed by COVID. Another thing which is really important to highlight is that there's big consensus for a new public health focused pharmaceutical system. We're only protected from COVID if everyone around the world is protected. And there's a huge consensus behind working together as quickly as we can to achieve a public health goal, which is surprisingly rare in the pharmaceutical system. And one of those things that we could all really benefit from is a collaborative research environment, and universities can be a big part of that. And finally, coming to you guys, is universities are being acknowledged as huge players in this field. Universities have always been huge contributors to research and huge determiners of who gets access to that research. but as you've seen, and hopefully you will see as we go through with this campaign, UK universities alone have got more than £20 million of funding to do their research. And so we're not only hoping that you can hold universities to account, but you can also celebrate them as well as the really key players to research that they are. Okay, yeah, so that's the opportunities and the risks. Gonna go into a couple of specifics and some exciting things. So this is Ursula, the President of the European Commission, on last Thursday, when she was launching the Access to COVID Accelerator. This was a huge global public pledging conference where governments pledged money to research and development for coronavirus technologies. So one thing that's coming out of this pandemic, and as I said before, has always been the case, but is now at the forefront of people's minds, is how much public funding goes into research. Governments are directly funding research in their own countries, such as at universities. They're funding bilateral organizations, they're funding the WHO, they're funding research accelerators. And the emphasis on just how much public funding contributes to the research environment is something that we can really capitalize on and emphasize. As Soraya said earlier, public funding is huge in terms of the development of medicines, but it's rarely acknowledged. But at the moment, it's really at the forefront of everyone's minds. However, something that we'll be building on throughout the campaign is the fact that public financing can't just be blank checks. It's been blank checks for decades, and it's not always resulted in equitable access to those technologies. So a really important part of what we'll be looking at is making sure that public funding comes with conditions for public benefit from that research. You need the pricing of vaccines to reflect the public contribution that went into them. And it's important to dispel the myth that pharmaceutical companies are the only ones who contribute to the development of these drugs. Because as you can see, and you will see, the public is a huge contributor and therefore should be a huge benefiter as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as I kind of mentioned earlier, I kind of covered this already, but it's nice to have the slide. Universities are incredibly important in this fight. So yeah, as I said before, we want to celebrate these researchers and we also want to hold them to account. So many researchers and universities feel disempowered, that they don't have control over what happens to their technology. That's very much not true. And it's difficult for a lot of researchers who spend their lives wanting to contribute to public health and the health of people around the world to then have the ability of their technologies to do that potentially taken away by how they're licensed. And we want to make sure that the wishes of the researchers as well as the public are reflected in how universities choose to license these technologies. We are part of a network called the Missing Medicines Alliance, who are a network of UK civil society who lobby the UK government and various other players on access to medicines issues. And we've been working with them a lot over the last few months. And I'm hoping you've seen some of these initiatives. You can see the Make Any COVID Vaccine Affordable for All petition, which was signed by, as you can see, thousands and thousands of people. We were part of that. We were also part of the contacting Matt Hancock to ask him to commit to these things as well. And we got thousands of people to email Matt Hancock, just his office's email, so he wasn't like completely overloaded and could still do COVID stuff, about access to medicines and the importance. You can see at the bottom, on the bottom right, we collaborated with Just Treatment to write to the Jenner Institute at Oxford to ask for more details about their licensing. And we've also been doing quite a lot of lobbying behind closed doors, including having meetings with the Labour shadow ministries and various other kinds of political engagement.
That was about the vaccine that's being developed largely in Oxford with UK public funding. To what extent does UAEM UK want to focus on access to that for the UK public who funded it, or are we going for a...
So the Oxford one is a really good question, and I don't know if you've seen, but their deal with AstraZeneca actually has an explicit statement that they will prioritize the UK public first, which is problematic on several levels. So yes, although it's a lot of UK public funding going into it, the Oxford vaccine is very much built on a wealth of global knowledge that came before it. The vector for the vaccine is something called the ChAdOx vector, which was developed, I think, originally as a measles vaccine or something like that. But it's a vector that's been around for several years and is very much based on a global knowledge base. And what they've done is they've adapted that for COVID, which is fantastic and great news. But it's still the product of a lot of collaborative innovation from a lot of people around the world. And I think a really important point to note is that for thousands and thousands of reasons, which would require, you know, several history lessons, the reason why countries in the global north are able to invest more in research and development is for a number of reasons which are not entirely fair at all. And the reason why lots of these companies have the money to invest is because lots of these countries have the money to invest and these companies have the money to invest is because the global intellectual property system is very much set, dominated, and made for countries in the global north. So even if a vaccine is entirely funded with UK public money, there is still very much a duty to make sure that countries who are historically underserved by the intellectual property system and other global governance systems still benefit from that research. We have started some actions at Oxford, and if you're at Oxford, you'll be very much integrated into that as we go forward. Anybody else got any other questions? So we're not going to wait until all the learning is over before you can start acting. We're going to be learning and acting at the same time. But for now, your only homework, other than joining the Slack channel and getting to know each other a bit, is to watch this film, Fire in the Blood. This film is the reason why I got involved in access to medicines. It's the reason why most of us got involved in access to medicines. It's a truly fantastic film which outlines the real burning injustices that are present in the access to medicines field. I think for me, one of the reasons why I'm in this field is because every single injustice that you can think of, racism, gender inequality, wealth inequality, all that kind of thing, it's in access to medicines. It's a cacophony of all the injustices in the world amplified by the fact that nobody can buy the drugs that they need. And if anything shows that better than anything, it's this film. So if you want to be, Nihal has watched it 5 times. And yeah, if you want to be inspired and have a bit more background about the HIV/AIDS story that Sarai was talking about and the scandal that is the intellectual property system, definitely watch this film. So that's your homework, which is watching a film, which is very nice homework. The next session we'll be having these sessions at the same time every week. The next session we'll be having will be on research and development. Where can we access the film? Nihal, there we go, it's on Netflix, sorry. The next session will be on research and development, and we'll be giving you a crash course in terms of why is research and development an essential part of access to medicines? Surely it's just like things are developed and then you do something with them. No, it's the actual process of research is an integral part of why the access to medicine space is so unequal. And we'll be diving a bit more into that. And we'll be looking a bit more into the COVID research environment. What's going on at the moment? How close are we? Who are working on what? And then we'll be giving you some tools to kind of do a bit more digging at your own university as well. And finding out what your university is researching, who are they researching it for, what kind of funding are they getting, all that kind of thing, which will help you shape your campaign. And all concerns. Oh, one thing to flag actually is more of a welfare point before we carry on with this, is that we want this to be an enjoyable thing for you. We don't want this to be something that's stressful, ridiculously high workload. We want this to be something that you feel equipped to do, that you feel is manageable, and that you feel excited to do. And given the fact that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, if your circumstances change, or you become incredibly stressed, or you have to join the NHS, or you have to look after a family member, anything at all, you're more than welcome to just flag this to the team, flag it to your team or to us confidentially or anything, and we can work out a way to make sure that the involvement is suitable to you. We do this because we enjoy it, and the last thing we want to do is have any of you stressed or overworked. So you are welcome to email us at any point if you're ever having any issues, if you feel you need to have work reallocated, anything like that, you can email us at any point. So just to flag, that yeah, please don't worry about that. We want this to be really fun, and we promise it will be. We've had a lot of fun so far already, and yeah, we're going to cause productive and useful trouble. So with that, I will end the session, and yeah, as always, email us any questions or queries. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great evening.